welcome to episode 281 of Late Night Linux, recorded on the 6th of May 2024. I'm Joe, and with me are Phelim.
Good evening.
Graham.
Hello.
And Jim.
Hello from America.
Yeah, thanks for joining us again, Jim.
Anytime.
Something occurred to me recently. I've been doing this podcasting about Linux Lark for around about 10 years. It's a little bit more than that, but let's just say 10 years. And a lot has changed in that 10 years. We've seen systemd become standard on all major distros. GNOME has come to just dominate the desktop. New ways to distribute software has come along, like Snaps and Flatpak and Docker and LXD. Composable distros like Fedora Silverblue and SteamOS have started to appear. Gaming is now a realistic prospect, and we've even seen Linux become part of Windows with WSL. So it got me thinking, what's going to change over the next 10 years? What do you think will happen in the next decade in the Linux and open source world?
We struggle to get a year's predictions, and you want us to go all the way to 10.
No, I don't want predictions. I want, just a reading of where things are going or likely to go.
Oh, that's exactly what a prediction is.
Oh, yeah.
It's funny because I'm sure we did this on Tux Radar, and I had a quick Google to see if I could find whatever we talked about, because that would be obviously more than 10 years ago, and it would have been fun. I'm sure we were wrong.
Here's one. I think next generation file systems are finally going to truly come into their own, and rather than like a small subset of weirdos depending on block level snapshots and replication and cloning and all the rest, I think it's going to become just standard issue, and it's a feature set that people will expect. I don't think that Btrfs is going to be the mainstream file system to deliver it, and I don't think ZFS will either, due to the licensing issues with ZFS that Oracle seems very uninterested in resolving. I suspect something else is going to come along that has neither Btrfs's history of technical issues nor ZFS's history of licensing issues. Maybe that'll be Bcachefs. Maybe it'll be something different. But I think that's going to become standard issue.
I'm not as convinced about that, because I think that the composable distros are going to just completely take over and effectively solve the same problem.
That's like saying you don't think people will be eating peanut butter because there's chocolate. Well, it turns out they go together really, really well, and having both in one place is considerably better than having only one of either.
I suppose, yeah.
I mean, you look at some of the work that George has been doing with ZFS on his Silverblue variants, and it's pretty interesting stuff. It comes down to, your composable OS has a lot of great benefits that largely revolve around being able to take essentially a giant hunk of code and data and say, okay, this is in an immutable block now, but you still got to move those blocks around, right? And having snapshots and replication makes that significantly easier and more effective and happen faster and more predictable and reliable, all of which are right down the middle of the lane that, the composable distros are trying to present you with to begin with.
I'm not sure if I see composable distros in the same way, and I think this is what I was going to say as well. I think they're really exciting and something to kind of predict for in 10 years' time becoming more mainstream. But I see them being used for servers or cloud installs, or as thin clients on Linux deployments where they just kind of fire and forget. The data's stored outside of the immutable distro, so the file system isn't so important. You just spin it up again if you need to.
The file system isn't so important, he says. Oh, the thing that you have to use to get any data in or out, including the code you're running, unimportant. Spoken like a true developer. I think there is a very real issue that there's only so far down beneath their feet that most people are willing to look. But ultimately, you cannot get away from the fact that the file system is one of, if not the most fundamentally important parts of your entire stack. If you can't reliably get data to and from disk, even if you say, well, there's a big subset of my data I don't put to this particular disk, dude, doesn't matter. That disk is there for a reason, and you need that stuff. And you can either get it reliably or you can't.
I don't know. I mean, we're in different worlds, and I think obviously there's lots of different cases for this. I can't see regular Linux users perhaps adopting composable distros in the same way that we're talking, so maybe nothing will change there, but certainly I can see a case for it.
I think regular Linux users use whatever Linux options are available to them, and if and when the industry shifts so heavily in the direction of composable that's what your mainstream Ubuntu and Fedora and everything else is, well, Linux desktop users are just going to go along for the transition, whether they're happy about it or not.
Yeah, there'll be the likes of Dev1 and whatever the equivalent of that is that probably Phelim will be using. But I think desktop Linux is just, it's bound to go this way. There's just no other future that I can see as the mainstream of Linux desktop.
I mean, essentially, we're talking about desktop Linux just becoming more like Android, really, when we talk about this particular issue and the overwhelming success of Android, and for that matter, iOS, just the mobile paradigm in general has proven itself to be something that is very effective for serving enormous numbers of relatively normal people.
I'm quite excited about that future. I really hope it's not iOS and I hope it's not Android, but the best aspects of those brought to Linux. I think I've said this before. I've got configuration files that are 20 years old. I shouldn't have them. It's so refreshing to just close all your tabs, and start afresh with something that you've composed with your configuration. I really like the idea.
I mean, you say that, but I started up Amarok last week and it used the config file when I last used it and it worked fine. I genuinely don't think composable OSs is a great idea, but I've been here before and I won't whinge about it again, but I genuinely don't think it's in our best interest long term. Short term, where we have all the people like George Castro and all those people who come from the world of the standard proper, let's call it that, Linux distro, who have built this system, yeah. But down the road in 10 years, at the end of 10 years, when Castro's gone off to play golf for the rest of his life, or whatever the hell he likes doing, do you have people there who really, really understand how it all works? Through the many build systems it's plowed through, to the bits that we don't touch because that's belong to that team, to the hackability goes away. I don't think it's a great plan.
Well, whether or not you think it's a good idea is irrelevant.
Okay, so I say it's a big disaster. We've shot ourselves in both feet. That's what I'd say.
But do you think it's going to happen?
Composability.
Yeah, do you think that's going to become the mainstream?
I don't know if it's going to... Well, how can Linux become... Linux isn't the mainstream. Yeah, various things like Android are, but...
No, the mainstream in Linux, come on. The Ubuntu and Fedora of the world.
Okay, they will probably do it, yeah.
Will Debian?
I can't see them agreeing to. It might.
Oh? Did they adopt Systemd?
They did, yeah, that's true.
And so why do you see them voluntarily adopting Systemd but not going composable?
Because I think composable is taking the power and moving it more to the build system and not necessarily to the user. And I think Debian's whole shtick is you're more in control, you're the user.
But what if you control the build system?
Yeah.
That's bollocks. Nobody wants to run their own fucking build system. Nobody wants to do that. Nobody. Only cloud wankers think that way. It's fucking ridiculous.
Who wants to build their own packages? And yet for packages to be there, someone has to build them.
Yeah, I know, but the thing is, you can change a package. If you have to start like fucking mounting shit, read, write, then you've fucked your system somewhat. It's different from that one. And then I don't know, all the fucking terminology that they use. I can't see anybody but the people really, really ingrained in that build are the ones who are going to do that.
I don't know who had Jim argues with Phelan on their bingo card, but here we go. I would argue that the composable stuff, it's all containerized. It's actually easier and safer for somebody who's not quite sure what they're doing to tinker with that stuff than to tinker with like raw package builds on a conventional system, precisely because everything lives in its own sandbox. And if you screw it up, you can pull it all out cleanly and go again. Whereas if you get a package half built, ugh.
Okay, sure, for packages, but everything in a container does not teach you how the container works. It teaches you how to get to the end result. And I don't think that's definitely the way that we've got as far as we've gotten.
What do I learn when I apt install Audacity that I would not learn if I snap installed Audacity or any other containerized system installed it?
You're talking about a single application that does a single thing. If you're talking about something like Nextcloud, it's, a database, it's a web server, it's all the various PHP files, whatever they've got going on. You're not learning anything about that. So you've taken the ability for somebody to really dig into that because they're not going to. They're going to go, oh, it's a container. I install a container.
That's the way that most people handle it if they apt install it using a meta package too. I mean, none of this is new.
No, it's not. But the thing is, if something is contained within a container, you're going to have to dig into the container to start with before you can start learning about it. You do not learn from Docker images. You just don't. I don't believe anybody who says they do.
I work really closely with the Ubuntu core team. And okay, so the caveat is that I work closely with the team, but it's very close to what you're saying. I see Ubuntu core as being a very composable kind of OS. the way that they're building it, and the conversations that the developers are having in terms of snapping the kernel, in terms of snapping the hardware description and its capabilities, and how those elements interact with one another in a confined way, are really interesting conversations that we've never been able to have because of the monolithic structure of Linux. And that's what's quite exciting about kind of the next 10 years or the next generation of what Linux distributions might look like.
That phrase, the monolithic construction of Linux, is an interesting one because it makes, I think, a very valid point that Phelan will absolutely hate, which is that composable operating systems are the Unix way.
Just no.
Oh, hear the pain.
Just no. It is just no. It's I see. The thing is, right, we've gotten to this point where we are, and now we're throwing all these layers on top of it because we just about have a functioning fucking system. No. We need to have things all intercommunicate in really complicated fucking ways. So nothing's going to work. Like, I have Wayland working now. Like, containerized Wayland, not a fucking chance is that working. Anyway, my thing I was going to say was, I think the war on general purpose computing is really going to take hold. And you know what? You just proved it right with your containerized shite.
I mean, that's not even a prediction. That's just open your window and look outside. The war on general purpose computing has long since begun. The question is whether it'll be over yet in 10 years, and I hope not.
I don't think that the war will ever be won. I don't know, maybe that's just dreaming. Because I like to think that, especially in the Linux world, there are always people who will just stick on the old way of doing things, whether that's a dev one or whatever, and just everyone will move on to the next thing, but there will always be people using that old thing. But I suppose if the hardware and the OS become so tightly bundled together that it's impossible to change that OS and the software running on it, then I suppose the war is over at that point.
I think that we're still going to be seeing a continued slide into worse and worse enshittification. We can already see the stranglehold that relatively small, large companies have on huge segments of industry. You know, if you want to work as a mechanical or electrical or civil engineer, you're going to be using Autodesk products almost entirely. Like, there's no other option. You can't just go get a different job that uses something different. Like, that's what you're going to be doing. And at this point, it feels like, you know, every single corporation of any size has demonstrated a complete willingness to cross any line that doesn't actually result in them immediately getting, I don't know, an enormous fine or something. And we don't have much of that kind of regulation. I would not be surprised with this trend that we've been seeing of the silos getting taller and taller and narrower. Like, at some point, you may see the big software vendors that have a lock on their niche, like, you know, Autodesk in the engineering world, or, you know, Intuit in the accounting world. They may start not supporting general purpose computing either. Now, obviously, you don't want to do that with like an app on your phone, but I'm not sure that we aren't going to see a return to like completely purpose-built hardware. Like, if you want to do an engineering drawing, you need an Autodesk Revit workstation from Autodesk.
Jesus.
That's a nightmarish future.
I really, really hope I'm very wrong about that.
So do I.
But I think that's what got a lot of us using Linux in the first place. When things were so siloed in the mid-90s, we accepted the harder, less powerful alternatives because they were open, and I'd be prepared to do that again.
Well, sure, but you can only do that as long as there's open hardware to begin with. And what we didn't have a war on in the 90s when Linux came to prominence was open x86-64 hardware. But the hardware is getting narrower and narrower, and you know, the segment of the computing market that it occupies is getting smaller and smaller as well. So when the only computing devices being sold that are, you know, fully like modern degrees of powerful are closed systems, now you're not talking about a return to, you know, like early 90s computing and going to Linux. You're talking about a return to like the early 2000s when people were literally, you know, using bugs in like save game files on Xboxes to hack them and install Xbox Media Center. And that's of necessity going to be a much, much smaller market than the early 90s, you know, adoption of Linux you were talking about. And that was already teeny tiny.
And what happens if they come along and say, oh yeah, well, you know, Linux can play with this as long as, you know, you're using our signed approved kernel. You know, you're going to use your Composable OS. It's got to be this. It's got to be that. It's got to be essentially what is effectively assigned and 2 thumbs up Android build like we have right now. That's not Linux, and that's not the system that I want to have on my system, because it serves nobody but the fucking companies. So
now we're seeing why I'm such a big RISC-V proponent. I am really pinning a lot of my personal hopes on that particular hardware stack and technology, because it has been designed to be so open from the ground floor, and I think that's going to be desperately needed in the years to come.
Having recently just watched Fallout, I'm beginning to wonder, should I start buying lots of crufty computer gear now that I can like crack them out every now and again when a monitor went pop? Don't worry, I've still got one of those 2020 era fucking monitors saved over here in my cupboard over here. Like, it's, you know, is it going to be Pis? It's going to be small form factor machines. It's not a great place to be, I think.
No, it's going to be old ThinkPads, and that's why I hoard them.
The only thing that will survive in a nuclear war: cockroaches typing on ThinkPads
and Amigas.
We'll all be running Serenity OS on RISC-V. Andreas, you're our only hope.
Have you seen a board that's worthy of use yet, that is even comparable to a current-ish system?
Not if you're talking about like a current-ish desktop. I've got a RISC-V dev kit.
Is it a sci-fi one or?
No, this one's not sci-fi. It is, God, I can't remember now. The sci-fi is like super fucking expensive. Their gear is like some of the fastest available on the market.
Yeah.
This was actually affordable. It was like like $100 kit, I think.
Is it comparative to a Pi, even like an older Pi, or?
Yeah, not a modern Pi. That's what I was about to say. It's probably comparable to maybe like an OG Pi or maybe a Pi 2.
Okay, it's still usable.
Yeah. It's a thing of like, other than philosophical reasons, like there's no reason to buy and use that right now. You know, the
Sure.
cost effectiveness is not there. It's useful if you want to do development for RISC-V. You want some hardware to test it on. It's usable if you just really want to follow, like, you know, where is that? You know, what's the state of RISC-V? You know, what can I do with it? Well, grab one of these things and play with it.
Yeah.
Okay, this episode is sponsored by Automox. Are you prepared for whatever shitstorm may hit your desk during the workday? Automox has your back. Check out the brand new Autonomous IT podcast. Listen in as various IT experts discuss the latest Patch Tuesday releases, mitigation tips, and custom automations to help with CVE remediations. Make new work friends. Listen now to the Autonomous IT podcast on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you tune into your podcasts. On to a bit of admin then. First of all, thank you everyone who supports us with PayPal and Patreon. We really do appreciate that. If you want to join those people, you can go to latenightlinux.com/support. And remember that for various amounts on Patreon, you can get an advert-free RSS feed of either just this show or all the shows in the Late Night Linux family. And if you want to get in contact, you can email show@latenightlinux.com. What about the future of the web? Molly White wrote an interesting article recently. We can have a different web where it's very poetically written. It's all about walled gardens. And she goes into this analogy of growing plants and taking cuttings and stuff.
I think I might say that right now we have a composable web.
Do we?
Front page 2000, baby.
Essentially, that is what we're talking about. Molly notes and lays out her unhappiness with the fact that, we're in a very siloed internet now. Most people see very little outside their own favored social media platform, be it Facebook or Twitter or, what have you. And, each one of the major platforms is full of those daring adventurers who've gone to a different platform and harvested the best memes that one had to offer and brought them back as screenshots. Most people don't even take that step of like browsing more than one platform, let alone getting out onto what we might consider the internet proper with, standalone websites and individual voices and not just somebody's meme or blog post or what have you.
I suppose even with podcasts, like most people listening to this just searched in their app for it.
Yep.
They didn't go out and find the website and click play on that.
Somebody was actually asking me for advice recently about, figuring out how to make sure that their podcast was accessible and not in terms of disability, just in terms of like, people finding it wherever they happen to look. And the first thought, of course, was it's hilarious. You're asking me and not Joe. But then beyond that, I was just like, well, basically, if it shows up on Spotify and Apple and Fireside, you're good to go. It'll be everywhere. But it's worth checking, like a random app every now and then. Just like find some random podcast app on Android that a few 100,000 people have installed, download it, install it, and look for your podcast and see if you find it.
Well, yeah, if it's on Apple Podcasts, it will be in that app because that's where they all come from. And Spotify, you have to submit it separately to that. But otherwise, yeah, if you're in those two places, and I would say YouTube as well, that's how to have your podcast be accessible to everyone.
I might argue that the version on YouTube is not properly a podcast anymore, but yeah. Or at the very least, it's not being distributed in a podcasty way.
Well, same with Spotify. That's not a podcast at all. That's just an audio show on a lockdown platform.
I think I would argue that Spotify is a bit closer because just the odd thing about a podcast on YouTube is, yes, you can deliver pure audio on YouTube, but it's always a bit weird. It's a bit odd.
Yeah. But what do we think is going to happen with the web in the next 10 years then? And the internet generally? Yeah, you're going to have these huge walled gardens like Facebook and whatnot, but are we not going to see more, at least nerdy people, setting up their own blogs and linking to each other and avoiding all the just horrendous bullshit?
Maybe, but let's be honest, most of us nerdy types aren't really setting up our own web servers and doing all these things, on our own from scratch to begin with. How many tech blogs essentially do you see, running on freaking Medium or, similar platforms because it's easier?
Substack. Ugh.
I didn't want to say the name, but that was the other one I was thinking of.
This is very similar to the discussion we had in the new year where I said, we've got to naively be the change. And I switched to Firefox. And this is one of the solutions that Molly proposes. We've just got to ignore the trolls, ignore the walled gardens and create the internet that we want for ourselves and fuck everyone else.
That's exactly what I've been trying to do. I stepped down as the moderator of RZFS after Reddit went freaking haywire last year. And I spun up my own site from scratch, practicalzfs.com, and, put a discourse server on that so that people could answer each other's questions and spread the knowledge and the love. And I gave an option for folks to, help me with the hosting bill. And, well, RZFS still gets a lot more traffic than PracticalZFS does. Are many of the answers very helpful? The signal and noise is not really that great, especially not by comparison. But most people still land there. And after about a year, I'm still paying for roughly half of the server bill for it myself. And I'm not really whining about that exactly. Honestly, I'll go on paying that server bill for as long as I'm around because that's important to me. But I think that does kind of say something about what the size we can really expect of these little islands of nerdiness is and what it's going to take to keep them running.
But what about when the likes of Reddit and Twitter and Facebook just get worse and worse and worse to the point where normal people start looking for alternatives?
What point is that, Joe?
Which part of the subverting of democracy was, that's okay. I don't mind that too much. I mean, as long as I can see my GIFs.
Honestly, I'm not trying to be snarky here. It's a genuine question. What point do you imagine is the point at which it becomes too much for normal people? Because I think most of us would have thought that was well before now, and it clearly isn't.
So Mark Zuckerberg shows up at your house and uses the toilet for a very, very long time.
Yeah. I mean, it's going to take something like that. Because, you look at Reddit, for example, you had Spez literally getting leaked out saying that, these inconvenient users are making a lot of noise, just ignore them and it blows away. And he was correct, despite the fact that everybody knew he said that. So, yeah, at what point is it too much for normal people?
Well, on that really cheerful note, we should probably get out of here then. Thank you again, Jim, for joining us. It's been great having you.
I'd say it's been great to be here, but honestly, this has been kind of a downer.
Welcome to Late Night Linux.
Go back to your security outbreaks.
Yeah, well, if people want to hear more of you, they can check out 2.5 admins, 2.5admins.com. We'll be back next week when normal service will probably be resumed, but we'll have to see. Until then, I've been Joe.
I've been Phantom.
I've been Graham.
And I've been Jim.
See you later.